A first-class ticket can buy you a comfortable seat, champagne and priority boarding, but it cannot buy you class. In the sterile, hushed environment of the Aerolux Global VIP boarding lounge at JFK, a successful black woman stood patiently holding a purse that would soon become the focal point of a venomous attack. To the wealthy couple behind her, she was an intrusion, and her simple leather bag was an object of ridicule. They had no idea that the woman they chose to mock held their entire world in her hands, and that the unassuming purse they sneered at contained a symbol of power they couldn't possibly comprehend. What was inside? It was a seal that would not only silence their mockery, but dismantle their lives, piece by painstaking piece. Stay tuned, because this isn't just a story of prejudice, it's a masterclass in karma. The air in the Aerolux Global Celestial Lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport was a carefully curated symphony of calm. It smelled of expensive leather, freshly brewed espresso, and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the air purifiers. It was an exclusive bubble designed to insulate its inhabitants from the frantic chaos of the terminals beyond its frosted glass doors. Dr. Serafina James stood near the front of the queue for Flight AL1, the prestigious overnight service to London Heathrow. She was a portrait of understated elegance, dressed in a tailored navy blue pantsuit that spoke of business, not bravado. Her hair was styled in intricate locks, adorned with a few delicate gold cuffs that caught the soft lighting. In her hand, she held a satchel. It was not a Birkin or a Chanel. It bore no ostentatious logo, no glittering hardware. It was a rich, coffee-brown leather, its surface showing the subtle lines and character of age, not neglect. The design was utilitarian, yet beautiful, with clean lines, a single sturdy brass clasp, and a thick, comfortable shoulder strap. To an undiscerning eye, it was simple. To a connoisseur, it was a piece of bespoke craftsmanship. To the couple standing directly behind her, it was an offense. Richard and Bethany Thorne were a monument to new money trying desperately to look old. He was a broad, florid man in his late 50s, his expensive suit stretched taut over a frame that enjoyed one too many business lunches. His voice was a permanent low boom, accustomed to filling boardrooms and silencing subordinates. Bethany, his wife, was a decade younger, painfully thin and sculpted by surgeons into an expression of perpetual mild surprise. She was draped in Fendi and clutched a stark white Hermes Kelly bag to her chest like a shield. The boarding announcement for Celestial First Class had just been made, and the line moved forward a single shuffling step. It was then that Richard's boom, poorly disguised as a stage whisper to his wife, sliced through the lounge's quiet hum. "I simply don't understand how the standards have slipped so much." He began, his gaze fixed on the back of Serafina's head. Celestial First used to mean something. Now it seems anyone can get in. Serafina's posture remained unchanged. She had spent a lifetime learning to filter out the background noise of prejudice, treating it with the same indifference as airport muzak. She was returning from a grueling 3-day summit in New York, where she had finalized the technical specifications for a project that would save Aerolux Global nearly $1 billion over the next decade. She was tired, her mind was still crunching numbers and thrust-to-weight ratios, and she was looking forward to 8 hours of quiet solitude at 35,000 feet. Bethany Thorne, however, now took her cue. Her voice was a high, reedy counterpoint to her husband's bass. "Look at that bag, Ricky. Did she get it at a flea market? It looks like something a college student would carry their books in." The jab was more direct. Serafina felt a familiar hot prickle at the back of her neck, but she kept her eyes forward, focused on the gate agent, checking the passports of the family in front of her. Don't give them the satisfaction, she told herself. They are insignificant. But Richard Thorne was not a man who liked to be ignored. He took a half-step closer, his voice growing louder, now clearly intended for Serafina and anyone else within earshot to hear. Probably an upgrade. Used all her points from a dozen budget flights to get a taste of the good life for once, he declared. Some people just don't have the Polish for this environment. They stick out. The word they hung in the air heavy and loaded. Several other passengers in the line shifted uncomfortably. An older gentleman in a tweed jacket frowned, but said nothing. A young woman scrolling through her phone glanced up, her expression troubled before quickly looking down again. The complicity of silence was an old and bitter acquaintance of Serafina's. The purse in her hand suddenly felt heavier. It was a gift from her mentor, Dr. Alistair Finch, a legend at MIT. The leather was repurposed from the cockpit seats of the XB-70 Valkyrie prototype, a plane they had both studied and revered. It held not just her laptop and papers, but a universe of sentiment, history, and achievement. It was a symbol of a legacy they were trying to tarnish with their cheap, ignorant insults. The family in front of her moved on, and it was her turn. She stepped forward, placing her passport and boarding pass on the counter. The gate agent, a harried-looking woman named Brenda, with a name tag askew, offered a tired, plastic smile. As Brenda processed her documents, Bethany's voice dripped like venom from behind her. Honestly, you'd think she'd have the decency to at least buy a decent knockoff. It's just embarrassing for everyone. That was it. The dam of Serafina's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. The insult wasn't just about her or her race or her perceived social standing. It was an insult to Dr. Finch's memory. It was an insult to the legacy of engineering and innovation that the purse represented. She turned slowly, her movements deliberate and devoid of aggression. She faced the Thornes, her gaze calm, but as penetrating as a laser. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the lounge with absolute clarity. "Is there a problem?" she asked. Richard Thorne puffed out his chest, a smirk playing on his lips. He was spoiling for a fight, a chance to exert his dominance. Just an observation. "That thing you're carrying. It's a bit rustic for Celestial First, don't you think I'm sorry?" Serafina replied, her tone dangerously even. "I wasn't aware you were the arbiter of the dress code. I'm more concerned with the contents of a person's character than the brand of their handbag." Bethany let out a little scoffing laugh. "Oh, here we go. We're going to get a lecture now." The confrontation had drawn the full attention of the gate agent. Brenda looked from the Thornes' expensive attire to Serafina's simple suit and made a split-second calculation rooted in years of unconscious bias. Ma'am Brenda said, her voice sharp, addressing Serafina. "Is there an issue here? These passengers are just waiting to board." "The issue," Serafina said, turning her head slightly to acknowledge Brenda without breaking eye contact with the Thornes, "is that this couple has been making loud derogatory comments about me and my belongings. I believe that falls short of the conduct Aerolux expects in its premium cabins." Richard laughed out loud. "Derogatory? We were talking about a purse. Don't be so sensitive. Now if you'll just move along, we'd all like to board." He gestured dismissively, as if shooing away a fly. This was the critical moment. Serafina knew it. She could let it go, board the plane, and stew in quiet rage for 8 hours. Or she could stand her ground. She thought of her father, a Tuskegee airman, who faced down prejudice far worse than this, with unshakable dignity. She thought of Dr. Finch, who taught her that the most elegant engineering solutions were often the simplest and most direct. She would be direct. "No," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. "I don't think I will just move along. Not until we've cleared this up. The battle lines had been drawn in the plush carpet of the Celestial Lounge, and Seraphina James was just getting started. The gate agent Brenda clearly saw the situation not as a matter of passenger harassment, but as a disruption. And in her world, the path of least resistance was to placate the loudest, most visibly affluent parties. She sized up the scene, the Thorns radiating an aura of entitled wealth, versus Seraphina, a black woman whose quiet confidence she misinterpreted as defiance. Her choice was instantaneous. Ma'am Brenda repeated her tone, hardening into one of a frustrated teacher dealing with a difficult child. She directed her words solely at Seraphina. "Please, let's not hold up the line. We have a schedule to keep. Just take your documents and proceed to the jet bridge." "I'll be happy to." Seraphina replied, her composure a stark contrast to the growing agitation around her. "As soon as I receive an apology from this couple for their disruptive and offensive behavior." Richard Thorne threw his hands up in mock exasperation. "An apology. For having an opinion. This is ridiculous, Brenda," he said, using her first name with an unearned familiarity that was both patronizing and a clear power play. "This woman is harassing us. We're the victims here." Bethany chimed in, her voice trembling with manufactured fragility. "She's being very aggressive. I feel quite threatened." She subtly shifted her body to be closer to her husband, completing the performance. Brenda's eyes narrowed at Seraphina. "Ma'am, you're creating a scene. The Thorns are valued Celestial members. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." "Step aside." Seraphina's eyebrows rose. "I'm the one being insulted and you want me to step aside. Am I understanding you correctly?" The sheer injustice of it was breathtaking. It was a classic playbook maneuver, the aggressor claiming victimhood and authority, siding with the familiar face of privilege. The other passengers were now fully invested, their whispers creating a low, buzzing hum. This was no longer just an unpleasant encounter. It was becoming a public spectacle. "You are holding up the boarding process for everyone." Brenda snapped her professional veneer, cracking completely. She pointed a sharp acrylic-nailed finger at a seating area a few feet away. "Go and wait over there. I will deal with you after the other Celestial passengers have boarded." The demand was not just dismissive, it was punitive. It was a public demotion, a casting out from the very privilege she was being accused of not belonging to. Richard Thorne smirked, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. He had won. He leaned toward Seraphina, his voice a low, taunting drawl. "You heard her? Go on now. Maybe they have some peanuts for you over there." The racist undertone was no longer subtle. It was a blaring klaxon. A collective gasp rippled through the small crowd of onlookers. Seraphina felt a cold fury settle in her chest, a dangerous, crystalline anger that sharpened her focus. She did not move. She simply looked at Brenda, whose face was now flushed with a mixture of anger and a dawning faint sense of unease that she might be miscalculating. "You are refusing to board a passenger with a valid, paid-for first-class ticket, based on the unfounded complaints of 2 other passengers who were actively harassing me." Seraphina asked, her voice, precise each word, a carefully placed stone. "You are ordering me out of a line I am entitled to be in. I would advise you to think very, very carefully about your next words. I can assure you they will be scrutinized." The formality of her language, the sudden shift from victim to inquisitor, gave Brenda a moment's pause. There was an authority in Seraphina's tone that didn't quite match the profile Brenda had created in her head. But Richard, emboldened by his perceived victory, decided to press his advantage. "Oh, scrutinized." "Listen to her," he boomed, laughing to the crowd. "Who do you think you are?" "The CEO." She probably got her ticket from some corporate diversity giveaway. Let's see your ticket again, sweetheart. Maybe it's a fake. This was the ultimate accusation, the one that encompassed all their others. You do not belong here. You are an imposter. Brenda seized on it. It was the out she needed, a procedural justification for her prejudice. Yes, I'm going to need to re-verify your ticket, ma'am. And your identification? There seems to be some confusion. She reached for Serafina's passport and boarding pass, which were still on the counter. Serafina placed her hand firmly over her documents. There is no confusion, Brenda. My ticket is valid. My identification is valid. The only confusion here is your decision to side with bullies over a legitimate passenger. Give me the documents or I will call security. Brenda threatened, her voice rising in pitch. The situation had spiraled. It was no longer about a purse. It was about her right to exist in this space, unchallenged. The threat of security was the final straw. They wanted to escalate. Fine. She would escalate, but she would do it on her own terms. That won't be necessary, Serafina said calmly. She looked past Brenda, past the thorns, her gaze sweeping over the silent, watching faces of the other passengers. She was disappointed, but not surprised. They were spectators at a public shaming, and as long as they weren't the ones being shamed, they were content to simply watch. She then looked down at the bespoke leather satchel in her hand, the object of their scorn, the symbol of her life's work, the thing they thought defined her as less than. All right, she thought. You want to know about my purse. You want to know who I am. Class is in session. With a slow, deliberate movement, she reached for the single brass clasp on her satchel. The sound of it opening a soft, satisfying click seemed to echo in the sudden, tense silence of the lounge. The thorns leaned in their faces, masks of smug anticipation, expecting her to pull out a tattered wallet or some other object they could use for a fresh round of mockery. They had no idea what was coming. The interior of the satchel was lined with a soft, dark grey Alcantara fabric, the kind typically found in the cabins of high-performance aircraft. Serafina bypassed her personal wallet, her phone, and a well-worn copy of a book on fluid dynamics. Her fingers found what she was looking for, a sleek black carbon fiber portfolio case, no bigger than a standard sheet of paper. She drew it out. The portfolio was unadorned, except for a single striking insignia laser-etched into its center. It was a stylized silver bird in flight, its wings forming a perfect arc over a gleaming globe. It was the emblem of Aerolux Global. But this was not the standard passenger-facing logo. This was the internal executive seal, reserved for the highest echelons of the corporation, the board members, the lead engineers, the C-suite. Richard Thorne squinted at it, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. What's that? Some kind of frequent flyer plaque? Serafina didn't answer him. She laid the portfolio flat on the counter in front of Brenda, positioning it so the seal was directly under the harsh fluorescent light. Then, with another precise movement, she opened it. Inside were not personal effects, but official documents. On the left side was a laminated ID card. Her photo was there, professional and serious, but it was the text below it that mattered. Dr. Serafina, James Lead Systems Architect and Independent Auditor, Project Odyssey, Aerolux Global Special Projects Division, Clearance Level Alpha 1. Brenda's eyes scanned the ID, her brain struggling to process the information. Special projects. She murmured, her voice, barely a whisper. On the right side of the portfolio was the top page of a report, its header stark and clear. Project Odyssey, Phase 3. Final Assessment and Implementation Protocol. Below that, a bold red stamp read, Corporate Confidential, Eyes Only, Distribution Level 0. Serafina then reached into her satchel one more time and produced a business card. It was heavy black cardstock with simple, silver-embossed text. She slid it across the counter to Brenda. "Brenda," she said, her voice dropping to a low, authoritative register that brooked no argument. Project Odyssey is the complete overhaul of Aerolux's transatlantic fleet engine efficiency and navigation systems. It is the single largest capital investment this airline has made in 20 years. For the past 3 days, I have been in New York with your CEO, Mr. David Chen, and the entire executive board personally signing off on the final stage of that project. The project that, as of 9 a.m., this morning is projected to increase this company's profit margin by 12% and save it from a potential hostile takeover by a rival carrier. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Brenda's face had gone from flushed red to a pasty, sickly white. Her mouth opened and closed silently. Serafina continued, her gaze unwavering. "This satchel," she said, lightly tapping the leather, "was a gift from my mentor. It carries the confidential technical data for that project. The seal on this portfolio," she tapped the carbon fiber, "grants me unrestricted access to any Aerolux facility aircraft or personnel in the world, including Brenda, the authority to review and report on the performance of customer-facing staff, especially those who fail to de-escalate conflicts and instead choose to harass senior auditors." The Thorns were frozen, their smug expressions melting away into slack-jawed disbelief. The world had just tilted on its axis, and they were sliding off. Just then, as if summoned by the sheer dramatic tension of the moment, a man in a sharply tailored suit hurried into the boarding area from the jet bridge. He was tall, with a salt-and-pepper hair and an air of frantic efficiency. He wore a gold Aerolux pin on his lapel that identified him as management. "Dr. James," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and panic. "We were getting worried. Mr. Chen just radioed the cockpit to ensure you were given every courtesy. He insisted we hold the flight. Is everything all right?" This was Marcus Vance, Aerolux's head of North American flight operations. His eyes darted from Serafina's stony face to Brenda's terrified one, then to the gobsmacked Thorns. He instantly recognized the telltale signs of a catastrophic customer service failure. Serafina turned her attention to Marcus, her expression unchanged. "Marcus, good to see you." "Actually, no. Everything is not all right." She gestured coolly towards the Thorns. "This couple, Mr. and Mrs. Thorn, seemed to believe that my presence in this line was an affront to their sensibilities. They took particular issue with my handbag and my race, though they were clever enough to only be explicit about the former." Then she shifted her gaze to Brenda, who looked as if she was about to faint. "And your gate agent Brenda decided that the appropriate course of action was to side with them, accuse me of causing a disturbance, and order me out of the line under threat of calling security." Marcus Vance's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, dawning horror, and finally pure, unadulterated damage control panic. He looked at the Thorns, who now seemed to shrink under his glare. He looked at Brenda, who was trembling, and he looked at the portfolio on the counter with its unmistakable executive seal. He knew exactly who Dr. Serafina James was. He knew that the CEO considered her the single most important consultant the airline had ever hired. He knew that her signature on that report was quite literally worth $1 billion to their company. And he knew that his gate agent and 2 loud-mouthed passengers had just committed a corporate sin of biblical proportions. "Oh no," Marcus whispered, the color draining from his own face. The quiet of the lounge was now absolute. Everyone was waiting for the axe to fall. It didn't take long. Marcus Vance snapped into action, with the speed of a man seeing his career and a significant chunk of the airline's reputation flashing before his eyes. His first move was to address Serafina, his voice a balm of profound and utter apology. Dr. James, on behalf of Aerolux Global. I am horrified. This is inexcusable. Please accept my deepest, most sincere apologies for the treatment you have received. This is not our standard. This is not who we are. He then turned to Brenda, and the warmth vanished from his voice, replaced by a glacial chill. Brenda, hand over your scanner. Suspend all boarding procedures immediately. You will report to my office first thing in the morning. Bring your union representative. You are officially suspended pending a full investigation. Brenda looked like she had been struck by lightning. She stammered, but they said, I don't care what they said. Marcus cut her off, his voice low and furious. Your job is to protect all our passengers, not to enable the prejudice of a few. You failed. Miserably. He took the scanner from her nerveless fingers and handed it to another agent, a young man who had been watching the entire scene with wide eyes. James, take over. Board the remaining passengers once I give the word. Next, he turned his laser-like focus on the Thorns. Richard, who had built his life on bluster and intimidation, seemed to shrivel under the executive's fury. Bethany was fumbling with the clasp of her Kelly bag, her eyes darting around, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, Marcus, began his voice dangerously calm. I have your names from the passenger manifest. I'm sure you are aware that every Aerolux ticket comes with a contract, a carriage agreement that all passengers must adhere to. This agreement includes a strict code of conduct. Harassing other passengers using discriminatory language and causing a public disturbance are all clear violations of that contract. Richard found a sliver of his old arrogance. Now hold on. It was a misunderstanding. You were just being bullies. Marcus interrupted, his voice like cracking ice. And here at Aerolux we have a zero-tolerance policy for that. Your carriage contract for Flight AL1 is hereby terminated. You will not be flying with us tonight. Bethany let out a horrified squeak. You can't do that. We have meetings in London. Our luggage is on the plane. We will have your luggage removed and brought to you, Marcus replied smoothly, already flagging down another staff member to handle the task. As for your meetings, you'll have to make other arrangements. Furthermore, I will be adding a permanent note to your customer profiles. Any future travel with Aerolux or our partner airlines will be subject to review. I imagine you'll find flying with us difficult from now on. This was a death sentence in the world of luxury travel, a corporate blackballing. The Thorns were being publicly excommunicated. The humiliation was total and absolute. Richard's face was a mottled mess of crimson and purple. He looked at Serafina, at the woman in the simple suit holding the simple purse, and for the first time, he seemed to truly see the magnitude of his miscalculation. There was no anger in his eyes now, only a dawning, terrifying understanding of the power he had so casually provoked. Please, he stammered, his voice a pathetic croak. This is an overreaction. Marcus ignored him. He turned back to Serafina, his demeanor shifting back to one of utter reverence. Dr. James, we have held the flight for you. Please allow me to personally escort you on board. The cabin crew is aware of the situation and will ensure your journey is as comfortable as possible. We've opened up the Celestial Suite for you, of course. The Celestial Suite was the airline's most exclusive, offering a private room with a full bed and its own bathroom, usually reserved for royalty or A-list celebrities, and priced at over $20,000 for a one-way trip. Serafina gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She had made her point. The initial fury had subsided, leaving behind a cold, weary sense of vindication. She picked up her portfolio, closed it, and placed it back in her satchel, the brass clasp clicking shut with a sound of finality. Without another glance at the disgraced Thorns or the ruined Brenda, she walked with Marcus towards the jet bridge. As she passed, the other passengers in the queue parted like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of awe, shame, and fear. They had witnessed a public execution, a swift and brutal reordering of the social hierarchy they all understood. The woman they had allowed to be mocked was, it turned out, the most important person in the entire airport. As she stepped onto the plane, the lead flight attendant, a woman named Chloe, with a kind, intelligent face, met her immediately. "Dr. James, welcome aboard. We are so sorry for the delay and for what you endured. Please right this way. We have your suite ready. Can I get you a glass of Dom Perignon before we take off?" Serafina managed a small, tired smile. "Thank you, Chloe. That would be lovely." She settled into the impossibly luxurious suite, the door sliding shut to cocoon her from the rest of the world. As the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, she looked out the window and saw the Thorns standing forlornly by the terminal glass, their mountain of designer luggage being unceremoniously dumped onto a baggage cart beside them. They looked small and insignificant from her vantage point. She took a sip of her champagne. The immediate karma had been satisfying a swift and public confirmation of right and wrong, but Serafina had a feeling that the story of Richard and Bethany Thorn was far from over. In her line of work, she knew that consequences had a way of echoing, of cascading through a person's life in ways they could never predict. She had a feeling their real punishment had yet to begin. For Richard Thorn, the humiliation at JFK was just the opening act of a personal and professional tragedy he had authored himself. The immediate problem was logistics. Getting a last-minute flight to London on another airline in any class was a nightmare. They ended up paying an exorbitant amount for 2 premium economy seats on a flight leaving 8 hours later, a humbling downgrade that felt like a physical blow. Their carefully planned schedule in London was shattered. They missed the pre-meeting dinner, arriving at their hotel disheveled and exhausted, the spectre of their public shaming clinging to them like the stale air of the second-rate cabin they had occupied. The next morning, Richard walked into the boardroom of Sterling Automotive, a major British luxury car manufacturer. He was there to finalize the largest deal of his career, Thorn Precision Components. His company was the sole bidder for a 10-year exclusive contract to supply mission-critical engine parts for Sterling's new line of electric vehicles. This contract was worth hundreds of millions of dollars and would elevate his company and his own status into the global big leagues. He was confident. The technical specs were perfect, the pricing was competitive. All that was left was the final handshake with Sterling's CEO, Sir Alistair Finch. Richard, feeling the need to re-establish his alpha status after the airport debacle, started the meeting with what he thought was a humorous, self-deprecating story about his travel woes. "You wouldn't believe the journey we had." He began chuckling. "Had a dreadful run-in with the staff at Aerolux. Some overzealous diversity hire on a power trip. You know how it is these days. Had to rearrange our whole schedule. But we're here now, that's the important thing." He expected sympathetic laughs. Instead, an arctic chill descended upon the room. The half-dozen executives around the table stared at him with expressions ranging from disbelief to outright hostility. Sir Alistair Finch, a distinguished man in his late 70s with piercing blue eyes, slowly removed his glasses. He placed them on the polished mahogany table with deliberate care. His name, of course, meant nothing to Richard Thorn, but it would. "Mr. Thorn, Sir Alistair," began his voice, quiet, but carrying immense weight. The overzealous diversity hire you are referring to. Could you describe her? Richard, confused by the reaction, blustered on. Oh, you know, American, black woman. Had some sort of chip on her shoulder about her cheap handbag of all things. Sir Alister's face became a stony mask. Her name wouldn't happen to be Dr. Seraphina James. Would it? Richard's blood ran cold. The name from the ID badge. How could this man possibly know her? Why, yes, he stammered. Do you know her? Sir Alister Finch leaned forward. Know her? Mr. Thorne, Seraphina. James was my star protégé at MIT. She is one of the most brilliant aeronautical and systems engineers of her generation. She is my goddaughter. The cheap handbag you so casually mocked was a personal gift from me, crafted from materials salvaged from a historic aircraft we both admired. I called her this morning to wish her well on her flight, and she relayed to me in great detail the story of your encounter. The silence in the boardroom was now so profound, Richard could hear the frantic pounding of his own heart. Sir Alister continued, his voice laced with contempt. We at Sterling Automotive pride ourselves on our partnerships. We build relationships based on mutual respect, integrity, and character. Your behavior at JFK demonstrated a profound lack of all three. You didn't just insult a fellow passenger, Mr. Thorne. You insulted a woman I consider family, and in doing so you have revealed the true nature of your own character. He stood up, his regal height, commanding the room. The technical specifications of your components are excellent, but we are not merely buying parts. We are entering into a decade-long partnership, and I will not, under any circumstances, partner with a man like you. He looked at his board members. The deal is off. We will be reopening the tender process immediately. Thank you for your time, Mr. Thorne. Please see yourselves out. It was a public execution. Part 2. Richard sat there, stunned, his mind, unable to comprehend the speed at which his world was collapsing. His company's future, his legacy, all of it incinerated in a matter of moments, because he couldn't resist mocking a black woman's purse. Meanwhile, Bethany's world was imploding in a different, but no less devastating way. The story, as stories among the elite often do, traveled faster than any airplane. The wife of one of the Sterling executives had been planning to attend a charity gala Bethany was chairing. After hearing what happened from her husband, she not only withdrew her considerable donation, but also made a few well-placed calls. By the time Bethany was nursing her shock back at the hotel, her phone was buzzing with cancellations. The gala committee was in revolt. A prominent social blogger got wind of the story, and a thinly veiled post about a transatlantic tantrum by a handbag-hating socialite went viral in their circles. Her carefully curated image of poised, benevolent philanthropy was shattered, replaced by the ugly reality of a petty, racist shrew. The doors that had always opened for her were now slamming shut in her face. The Thornes were ruined, not by a lawsuit, not by a corporate battle, but by the simple, inescapable consequences of their own actions, rippling outwards and touching every corner of their privileged lives. The karma was not just hard. It was poetic. They had judged Seraphina on her surface, on her bag, on her skin. And in the end, it was their own deeply flawed characters that were judged and found wanting, with a verdict that was both final and absolute. The flight back to New York was the longest 8 hours of Richard Thorne's life. He and Bethany flew commercial coach, a circle of hell he hadn't experienced in 30 years. They didn't speak a word to each other, each trapped in their own private nightmare of shame and recrimination. The news of the lost Sterling contract had preceded him. His phone was a relentless torrent of panicked emails and voicemails from his board of directors, his CFO, and his major investors. Thorne Precision Components was a publicly traded company. The Sterling deal was the linchpin of their 5-year growth strategy. Its collapse would be catastrophic. By the time he landed, his company's stock was already in freefall based on rumors of the deal's cancellation. An emergency board meeting was called for the next morning. Richard stood before his board, a group of stony-faced men and women who had until 48 hours ago revered him. He tried to explain, to spin the story. He called it a cultural misunderstanding, a personality clash with the sterling CEO. But the board had done its own digging. The connections were not hard to make. So let me get this straight, Richard said. Eleanor Vance, a formidable woman who controlled a large block of shares. You lost us a $500 million contract because you and your wife decided to pick on a woman at the airport. And that woman just so happens to be the goddaughter of the CEO you were meeting with. It was more complicated than that. Richard pleaded, sweat beading on his forehead. No, it really isn't, Eleanor shot back. It's the single most idiotic, self-destructive act of corporate malpractice I have ever witnessed. You didn't just lose us a deal. You've made us a laughingstock. You have exposed this company to shareholder lawsuits. You, Richard, have become a liability. The verdict was swift. By noon, the board had voted unanimously. Richard Thorne was forced to resign as CEO of the company he had built from the ground up. He was given a severance package dictated by the bare minimum of his contract and was escorted out of the building by security, his personal effects in a cardboard box. It was the ultimate humiliation, a mirror image of how he had seen so many others dismissed over the years. But the universe wasn't finished with him. Yet. A week later, sitting in his cavernous home office, surrounded by the trappings of a life that now felt like a hollow shell, he received a registered letter. It was from Aerolux Global's legal department. He assumed it was a formal notice of his blacklisting, but it was much worse. The letter stated that Thorne Precision Components had recently submitted a bid to become a secondary supplier for a massive fleet upgrade initiative. The initiative was codenamed Project Odyssey. The letter informed him that due to a mandatory ethics and character review of all potential vendors, his company's bid was being summarily rejected. The rejection, it noted, was personally signed off on by the project's lead systems architect, Dr. Serafina James. The name hit him like a physical punch. It wasn't just that she was connected to Sterling. She was at the very heart of Aerolux, too. He hadn't just provoked a single powerful individual. He had stumbled into the nexus of two of the most important business relationships in his life. He had thought he was punching down at a nobody. In reality, he had been standing in the middle of a freeway, picking a fight with two oncoming trucks. He realized with a sickening lurch that she hadn't needed to lift a finger in revenge. She didn't have to make a single vengeful phone call. All she had to do was her job. She was an auditor, a gatekeeper. By simply applying the standard rules of conduct and ethics required for a project of that magnitude, she had disqualified him. His own behavior was the weapon used against him. It was a clean, professional, and utterly devastating checkmate. His last hope had been to salvage some business with Aerolux to staunch the bleeding from the Sterling disaster. Now that door was not just closed, it was welded shut with her signature on the seal. The news of the second rejection leaked. The stock, which had stabilized, plummeted again. Thorne Precision Components was now officially toxic. A hostile takeover, once a distant threat, was now an imminent certainty. The company would be bought for pennies on the dollar, carved up and sold for scrap. His life's work would be erased. Desperate, broken, and out of options, Richard did the one thing he had never done in his life. He decided to beg. He found the contact information for Dr. Serafina James's consulting firm in Boston. He called and left a message, then another and another. Finally, to his astonishment, her assistant called back and scheduled a video conference for the following Friday. He didn't know if it was a sign of mercy or a summons to his own execution. He only knew he had to take the chance. He had to look into the face of the woman whose life he had tried to diminish and plead for the survival of his own. The week leading up to the video conference was a journey through the 9 circles of Richard Thorne's personal hell. The silence in his sprawling Tudor mansion in Greenwich was the loudest sound he had ever heard. It was a silence created by the absence of everything that had once defined him, the incessant pinging of market alerts, the deferential calls from his assistants, the clinking of glasses as Bethany planned their next social conquest. Now there was nothing. Bethany was gone. She had packed her essential wardrobe, a collection of bags, shoes, and dresses worth more than a small home, and decamped to her sister's in Palm Beach. Her parting words had been delivered with the cold precision of a surgeon. "You didn't just ruin yourself, Ricky. You made us a punchline. I can survive losing money. I cannot survive being a joke." His company, his life's work, was being circled by vultures. The hostile takeover was no longer a threat. It was a foregone conclusion, a matter of lawyers haggling over the price of the carcass. He would walk away with a fraction of his former wealth, a man permanently stained by scandal. He spent his days staring at the artifacts in his home office. The framed CEO of the Year award from 3 years prior felt like a cruel taunt. A photograph of him shaking hands with a senator seemed to be from another man's life. He was a king in exile, banished from his own kingdom by a single catastrophic error in judgment. His only hope, the thinnest sliver of light in the crushing darkness, was this call, the Aerolux contract. It was an impossible long shot, but it was the only shot he had. If he could just get it back, he could present it to the board, to the investors, as a sign of life, a reason to fight the takeover, a path back from the abyss. He spent hours rehearsing what he would say. He practiced apologies in front of the mirror, trying to strike the perfect balance between contrition and dignity, a feat he now realized was impossible. He knew he couldn't charm her. He couldn't intimidate her. All he could do was appeal to a sense of mercy he had no right to expect. On Friday morning, he put on a suit. The familiar weight of the tailored wool felt foreign, like a costume for a role he no longer knew how to play. He sat at his massive mahogany desk, the screen of his laptop a black reflective void. At precisely 10 Waro a.m., a sterile electronic chime echoed in the silent room, and her image materialized. Dr. Serafina James appeared in perfect high-definition clarity. The quality of the feed was so sharp, he could see the intricate weave of the fabric on her blazer and the faint, focused reflection of a data-filled screen in her calm, dark eyes. She was in her element. Behind her were the promised whiteboards, a beautiful chaos of equations and aerodynamic diagrams. On her desk sat a gleaming 3D-printed model of a next-generation jet engine turbine, its complex blades a work of metallic art. She was surrounded by a world of logic, precision, and progress. He was surrounded by the relics of his own demise. Her expression was neutral, devoid of the triumph he had feared, or the anger he felt he deserved. It was the dispassionate, focused look of an auditor beginning an inspection. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice perfectly even, betraying no emotion. "You requested this meeting." The carefully rehearsed words in his mind evaporated. He was left exposed, a specimen under her microscope. "Dr. James," he began, his own voice sounding thin and reedy in the oppressive quiet. "Yes. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I wanted to apologize, properly." He took a shaky breath, forcing himself to meet her gaze on the screen. "What I did at the airport was reprehensible. There is no other word for it. My comments about your purse, my challenging your right to be there, It was born of an arrogance and a prejudice that I can't explain or excuse. It was ugly, it was cruel, and it was directed at you for no reason other than my own profound character flaws. My wife and I were wrong. I was wrong. And for that, from the bottom of my soul, I am sorry. Serafina listened to the entire speech without a single flicker of her expression. She let the silence hang in the air for a long moment after he finished a quiet pressure that forced him to realize the inadequacy of his words. "Apology noted, Mr. Thorne," she said finally. The quick clinical acceptance was more chilling than any tirade would have been. It wasn't forgiveness, it was a procedural acknowledgement, like ticking a box on a form. He pressed on his desperation, making him clumsy. "Thank you. Dr. James." "Serafina, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I'm not just asking for myself. The consequences of my actions, they've been catastrophic. I've been forced out of my own company. Thorne Precision is on the verge of being dismantled. This isn't just about my legacy anymore. There are nearly 800 people who work for me. Good people with families, mortgages. The Aerolux contract. It was their lifeline. It was our last best hope to stabilize things, to save those jobs. I am begging you not for my sake, but for theirs. Please reconsider the bid. Let my company survive my failures." He had laid his last card on the table, the appeal to the innocent bystander. He hoped it would trigger some sense of empathy, some reluctance to be the cause of so much collateral damage. Serafina leaned forward slightly, her hands clasping on the desk. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted. The neutrality was gone, replaced by the precise, didactic cadence of a professor dismantling a flawed thesis. "Mr. Thorne, let's be very clear about something," she began. "You are operating under the misapprehension that this is a personal matter. That I am sitting here weighing your apology against my feelings to decide the fate of your company. That is incorrect. My feelings are irrelevant. Vengeance is an inefficient, emotionally driven variable. In my world, variables like that are the first to be eliminated from any equation." Her words were like ice water, extinguishing the last embers of his hope. "My sole function in Project Odyssey," she continued, "is to identify and eliminate points of failure. We subject every component, every line of code, and every single vendor to rigorous stress testing. We need to know with absolute certainty how they will perform under pressure." She picked up the turbine model from her desk, turning it over in her hands. "You, mister. Thorne presented me with an unscheduled real-world stress test at JFK. What you saw as a social interaction, I now see as a data set. The data shows that when you were presented with a minor anomaly, a person you perceived to be outside of your expected parameters, your system of judgment defaulted to prejudice and hostility. You demonstrated a catastrophic lack of emotional control and situational awareness. You escalated a situation that required nothing. This, Mr. Thorne, is a critical point of failure." She placed the model down with a soft click. "Now let's extrapolate that data. You argue that your personal behavior is separate from your company's professional capabilities. I argue that the character of a leader is the foundational operating system of their entire organization. A leader who believes his status exempts him from common decency is a leader who may believe his company is exempt from stringent safety regulations. A leader who prioritizes his own ego over de-escalation is a leader who might encourage his engineers to hide a manufacturing flaw rather than report it and risk a contract delay. A leader who so readily misjudges a person based on superficialities is a leader who is prone to calamitous business misjudgments." She paused, letting the indictment settle. Richard felt his face flush with a hot, profound shame. She wasn't just talking about the airport. She was defining the entire arrogant philosophy that had guided his life. "And that brings me to your employees," Serafina said, her gaze sharpening, directly addressing his final desperate plea. "You present them as a shield, a reason for me to show mercy. But that is another miscalculation. The responsibility for their welfare was and always has been yours. You were the steward of their livelihoods, and you chose to gamble all of it, the jobs of 800 people, for the fleeting, pathetic thrill of sneering at a woman's handbag in an airport lounge. Their fate was not sealed by my report, Mr. Thorne. It was sealed by your character. Asking me to ignore my findings for their sake is asking me to be complicit in your recklessness. It is asking me to prioritize your desire to be saved from your consequences over my duty to ensure the safety of millions of Aerolux passengers. It was the final, devastating blow. She had taken his last defense and turned it into his ultimate condemnation. My decision was not personal," she concluded, her voice returning to its calm, audit-like finality. "It was a risk assessment. I am the lead architect of a multi-billion-dollar system. The lives of passengers and crew will depend on the integrity of my work. You, Mr. Thorne, and your company under your influence represent a compromised component. A bad risk. I would no more approve your bid than I would sign off on a turbine blade that I know has a microscopic stress fracture, because my one and only job is to ensure the system does not fail." She leaned back in her chair. The audit was complete. Richard Thorne had nothing left. No arguments, no pleas, no defenses. He had walked into this meeting hoping to face a vengeful victim. Instead, he had faced an unassailable force of logic. She hadn't just defeated him. She had rendered him irrelevant. He was a bug in her code, and she had simply, efficiently, and dispassionately written him out. I see he finally whispered the two words carrying the weight of his entire shattered world. "Thank you for your time, Doctor." He moved the cursor and ended the call. The screen went black, reflecting the image of a pale, broken man in a suit that no longer fit. He stared at his own reflection at the ghost in the machine. And for the first time in his life, Richard Thorne understood the true meaning of being bankrupt. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a purse. It was a story about perception. Richard and Bethany Thorne looked at Dr. Serafina James and saw a target for their prejudice. They saw what they wanted to see. But they failed to see the truth, a woman of immense power, intellect, and integrity, who held the keys to the very world they so desperately wanted to dominate. Karma in this story wasn't a magical force. It was the simple logical outcome of actions. Their arrogance was a boomerang they threw with all their might, and it came back with devastating precision. Dr. James never sought revenge. She simply continued to operate with the excellence and integrity that defined her. Her power wasn't in her title or her connections, but in her character. She teaches us a powerful lesson: never ever underestimate someone based on your own narrow biases. The quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. The most unassuming package can hold the most valuable contents. What did you think of Dr. James's final decision? Was it cold-hearted, or was it the most fitting justice possible? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of poetic justice and quiet strength resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more real-life stories where character is tested and karma is always served. Thank you for listening.